Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. First, I'd like to start by thanking all the families that are here today, all the parents who are here because of a child they have lost, all the families that are here because you want us to see you and to know your concern. You have contacted each of us in our offices expressing your grief, your loss, your passion, and your concern. And the audience that is watching can't see this. They can see you, the witnesses from the companies. But this room is packed as far as the eye can see. And when this hearing began, many of you picked up and held pictures of your beloved and lost children. I benefit from and participate in social media, as do many members of the committee and our nation and our world. There are now a majority of people on Earth participating in and in many ways benefiting from one of the platforms you have launched or you lead or you represent. And we have to recognize there are some real positives to social media. It has transformed modern life, but it has also had huge impacts on families, on children, on nations. And there's a whole series of bills championed by members of this committee that tries to deal with the trafficking in illicit drugs, the trafficking in illicit child sexual material, the things that are facilitated on your platforms that may lead to self-harm or suicide. So we've heard from several of the leaders on this committee, the chair and ranking and very talented and experienced senators. The frame that we are looking at this is consumer protection. When there is some new technology, we put in place regulations to make sure that it is not overly harmful. As my friend Senator Klobuchar pointed out, one door flew off of one plane, no one was hurt, and yet the entire Boeing fleet of that type of plane was grounded, and a federal fit-for-purpose agency did an immediate safety review. I'm going to point not to the other pieces of legislation that I think are urgent that we take up and pass, but to the core question of transparency. If you're a company manufacturing a product that is allegedly addictive and harmful, one of the first things we look to is safety information. We try to give our constituents, our consumers, warnings, labels that help them understand what are the consequences of this product and how to use it safely or not. As you've heard pointedly from some of my colleagues, if you sell an addictive, defective, harmful product in this country in violation of regulations and warnings, you get sued. And what is distinct about platforms as an industry is most of the families who are here because there were not sufficient warnings and they cannot effectively sue you. So let me dig in for a moment if I can, because each of your companies voluntarily discloses information about the content and the safety investments you make and the actions you take. There was a question pressed, I think it was by Senator Graham earlier, about TikTok. I believe, Mr. Chu, you said invest $2 billion in safety. My background memo said your global revenue is $85 billion. Mr. Zuckerberg, my background memo says you're investing $5 billion in safety in Meta, and your annual revenue is on the order of $116 billion. So what matters, you can hear some expressions from the parents in the audience, what matters is the relative numbers and the absolute numbers. Your data folks, if there's anybody in this world who understand data, it's you guys. So I want to walk through whether or not these voluntary measures of disclosure of content and harm are sufficient. Because I would argue we're here because they're not. Without better information, how can policymakers know whether the protections you've testified about, the new initiatives, the starting programs, the monitoring, and the takedowns are actually working? How can we understand meaningfully how big these problems are without measuring and reporting data? Mr. Zuckerberg, your testimony referenced a National Academy of Sciences study that said at the population level, there is no proof about harm for mental health. Well, it may not be at the population level, but I'm looking at a room full of hundreds of parents who have lost children. And our challenge is to take the data and to make good decisions about protecting families and children from harm. So let me ask about what your companies do or don't report. And I'm going to particularly focus on your content policies around self-harm and suicide. And I'm just going to ask a series of yes or no questions. And what I'm getting at is, do you disclose enough? Mr. Zuckerberg, from your policies prohibiting content about suicide or self-harm, do you report an estimate of the total amount of content, not a percentage of the overall, not a prevalence number, but the total amount of content on your platform that violates this policy? And do you report the total number of views that self-harm or suicide-promoting content that violates this policy gets on your platform?
Yes, Senator. We pioneered a quarterly reporting on our community standards enforcement across all these different categories of harmful content. We focus on prevalence, which you mentioned, because what we're focused on is what % of the content that we take down.
So, Mr. Zuckerberg, I'm going to interrupt you, and you're very talented. I have very little time left. I'm trying to get an answer to a question, not as a percentage of the total, because remember, it's a huge number, so the percentage is small. But do you report the actual amount of content and the amount of views self-harm content received?
No, I believe we focus on prevalence.
Correct. You don't. Ms. Yacarina, yes or no? You report it or you don't?
Senator, as a reminder, we have less than 1% of our users that are between the ages of 13 and 17.
Do you report the absolute number of how many images and how often viewed?
Posts and accounts that we've taken down in 2023.
Yes.
We've taken over almost 1 million posts down that in regards to mental health and self-harm.
Mr. Chu, do you disclose the number of appearances of these types of content and how many are viewed before they're taken down?
Senator, we disclose the number we take down based on each category of violation and how many of that were taken down proactively before it was reported.
Mr. Spiegel?
Yes, Senator, we do disclose.
Mr. Citron?
Yes, we do.
So I've got 3 more questions I'd love to walk through if I had unlimited time. I will submit them for the record. The larger point is that platforms need to hand over more content about how the algorithms work, what the content does, and what the consequences are. Not at the aggregate, not at the population level, but the actual numbers of cases so we can understand the content. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I have a bipartisan bill, the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, co-sponsored by Senators Cornyn, Klobuchar, Blumenthal on this committee and Senator Cassidy and others. It's in front of the Commerce Committee, not this committee. But it would set reasonable standards for disclosure and transparency to make sure that we're doing our jobs based on data. Yes, there's a lot of emotion in this field, understandably. But if we're going to legislate responsibly about the management of the content on your platforms, we need to have better data. Is there any one of you willing to say now that you support this bill? Mr. Chairman, let the record reflect a yawning silence from the leaders of the social media platforms. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Coons. We're on the first of 2 roll calls, and so please understand if some of the members leave and come back, it's no disrespect. They're doing their job. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tragically, survivors of sexual abuse are often repeatedly victimized and re-victimized over and over and over again by having non-consensual images of themselves on social media platforms. There's a NCMEC study that pointed out there was one instance of CSAM that reappeared more than 490,000 times after it had been reported. So we need tools in order to deal with this. We need, frankly, laws in order to mandate standards so that this doesn't happen, so that we have a systematic way of getting rid of this stuff, because there is literally no plausible justification, no way of defending this. One tool, one that I think would be particularly effective, is a bill that I'll be introducing later today, and I invite all my committee members to join me. It's called the PROTECT Act. The PROTECT Act would, in pertinent part, require websites to verify age and verify that they've received consent of any and all individuals appearing on their site in pornographic images. And it also requires platforms to have meaningful processes for an individual seeking to have images of him or herself removed in a timely manner. Ms. Yaccarino, based on your understanding of existing law, what might it take for a person to have those images removed, say from X?
Senator Lee, thank you. It sounds like what you're going to introduce into law in terms of ecosystem-wide and user consent sounds exactly like part of the philosophy of why we're supporting the SHIELD Act, and no one should have to endure non-consensual images being shared online.
Yeah, and without that, without laws in place, and it's fantastic anytime a company, as you've described with yours, wants to take those steps, it's very helpful. It can take a lot longer than it should, and sometimes it does, to the point where somebody had images shared 490,000 times after it was reported to the authorities, and that's deeply concerning. But yes, the PROTECT Act would work in tandem with. It's a good complement to the SHIELD Act. Mr. Zuckerberg, let's turn to you next. As you know, I feel strongly about privacy and believe that one of the best protections for an individual's privacy online involves end-to-end encryption. We also know that a great deal of grooming and sharing of CSAM happens to occur on end-to-end encrypted systems. Tell me, does Meta allow juvenile accounts on its platforms to use encrypted messaging services within those apps?
Sorry, Senator, what do you mean juvenile?
Underage, people under 18.
Under 18. We allow people under the age of 18 to use WhatsApp, and we do allow that to be encrypted, yes.
Do you have a bottom level age at which they're not allowed to use it?
I don't think we allow people under the age of 13.
Yep. What about you, Mr. Citron? On Discord, do you allow kids to have accounts to access encrypted messaging?
Discord is not allowed to be used by children under the age of 13, and we do not use end-to-end encryption for text messages. We believe that it's very important to be able to respond to well-formed law enforcement requests, and we're also working on proactively building technology. We're working with a nonprofit called Thorn to build a grooming classifier so that our Teen Safety Assist feature can actually identify these conversations if they might be happening, so we can intervene and give those teens tools to get out of that situation, or potentially even report those conversations and those people to law enforcement.
And encryption, as much as it can prove useful elsewhere, it can be harmful, especially if you're on a site where you know children are being groomed and exploited. If you allow children onto an end-to-end encryption enabled app, that can prove problematic. Now, let's go back to you for a moment, Mr. Zuckerberg. Instagram recently announced that it's going to restrict all teenagers from access to eating disorder material, suicidal ideation themed material, self-harm content, and that's fantastic. That's great. What's odd, what I'm trying to understand is why it is that Instagram is only restricting, it's restricting access to sexually explicit content, but only for teens ages 13 to 15. Why not restrict it for 16 and 17-year-olds as well?
Senator, my understanding is that we don't allow sexually explicit content on the service for people of any age. How
is that going?
Our prevalence metrics suggest that I think it's 99% or so of the content that we remove, we're able to identify automatically using AI systems. So I think that our efforts in this, while they're not perfect, I think are industry leading. The other thing that you asked about was self-harm content, which is what we recently restricted. And we made that shift. I think the state of the science is shifting a bit. Previously, we believed that when people were thinking about self-harm, it was important for them to be able to express that and get support. And now more of the the thinking in the field is that it's just better to not show that content at all, which is why we recently moved to restrict that from showing up for those teens at all.
Okay, is there a way for parents to make a request on what their kid can see or not see on your sites?
There are a lot of parental controls. I'm not sure if I don't think that we currently have a control around topics, but we do allow parents to control the time that the children are on the site. And also, a lot of it is based on kind of monitoring and understanding what the teen's experience is. What they're interacting with,
Mr. Citrin, Discord allows pornography on its site. Now, reportedly, 17% of minors who use Discord have had online sexual interactions on your platform, 17%. And 10% have those interactions with someone that the minor believed to be an adult. Do you restrict minors from accessing Discord servers that host pornographic material on them?
Senator, yes, we do restrict minors from accessing content that is marked for adults. Discord also does not recommend content to people. Discord is a chat app. We do not have a feed or an algorithm that boosts content. So we allow adults to share content with other adults in adult-labeled spaces, and we do not allow teens to access that content.
Okay. I see my time's expired. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. We are here in this hearing because as a collective, your platforms really suck at policing themselves. We hear about it here in Congress with fentanyl and other drug dealing facilitated across platforms. We see it and hear about it here in Congress with harassment and bullying that takes place across your platforms. We see it and hear about it here in Congress with respect to child pornography, sexploitation, and blackmail. And we are sick of it. It seems to me that there is a problem with accountability because these conditions continue to persist. In my view, Section 230, which provides immunity from lawsuit, is a very significant part of that problem. If you look at where bullies have been brought to heel recently, whether it's Dominion finally getting justice against Fox News after a long campaign to try to discredit the election equipment manufacturer, or whether it's the moms and dads of the Sandy Hook victims finally getting justice against InfoWars and its campaign of trying to get people to believe that the massacre of their children was a fake put on by them, or even now, more recently, with a writer getting a very significant judgment against Donald Trump after years of bullying and defamation. An honest courtroom has proven to be the place where these things get sorted out. And I'll just describe one case, if I may. It's called Doe versus Twitter. The plaintiff in that case was blackmailed in 2017 for sexually explicit photos and videos of himself, then aged 13 to 14. A compilation video of multiple CSAM videos surfaced on Twitter in 2019. A concerned citizen reported that video on December 25th, 2019, Christmas Day. Twitter took no action. The plaintiff, then a minor in high school in 2019, became aware of this video from his classmates in January of 2020. You're a high school kid, and suddenly there's that. That's a day that's hard to recover from. Ultimately, he became suicidal. He and his parents contacted law enforcement and Twitter to have these videos removed on January 21st and again on January 22nd of 2020, and Twitter ultimately took down the video on January 30th, 2020, once federal law enforcement got involved. That's a pretty foul set of facts. And when the family sued Twitter for all those months of refusing to take down the explicit video of this child, Twitter invoked Section 230. And the district court ruled that the claim was barred. There is nothing about that set of facts that tells me that Section 230 performed any public service in that regard. I would like to see very substantial adjustments to Section 230 so that the honest courtroom, which brought relief and justice to E. Jean Carroll after months of defamation, which brought silence, peace, and justice to the parents of the Sandy Hook children after months of defamation and bullying by InfoWars and Alex Jones, and which brought significant justice and an end to the campaign of defamation by Fox News to a little company that was busy just making election machines. So I would, my time is running out. I'll turn to, I guess Senator Cruz is next. But I would like to have each of your companies put in writing what exemptions from the protection of Section 230 you would be willing to accept, bearing in mind the fact situation in Doe versus Twitter, bearing in mind the enormous harm that was done to that young person and that family by the non-responsiveness of this enormous platform over months and months and months and months. Again, think of what it's like to be a high school kid and have that stuff up in the public domain and have the company that is holding it out there in the public domain react so disinterestedly. Okay? Will you put that down in writing for me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses. Done. Senator